Well, with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. So we will call to order the Duval City Council Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, April 21st. It's 5:32, I think it is. We'll start off with good of the order. I think probably the easiest way, if you just simply put your hand up, if there's a bunch of folks, then I'll kind of get a list going and then call on you individually. Anything for the good of the order? Councilmember Napland.
So I just wanted to request that we could get an update from Steve on the 275th Complete Streets project.
We can do that. Steve has another topic. Steve, can you do that for us during the meeting? Looks like Steve's connecting to audio here. Steve, can you hear me okay? So Councilmember Napland asked about a 275th update. Could you do that during our second item on 6-year transportation? How are you doing, Steve? Can you hear me okay? Okay, I show that you're on mute, Steve. I show you're on mute still.
On mute.
There you go. Now I can hear you. So Councilmember Napland asked if we could get an update on 275th. Is that something you could do during our 6-year transportation improvement?
We can do it there, or we can do it at the end of the other items, wherever.
Okay, good. Thank you. We'll do that. Thank you. Councilmember Hogue.
Okay, so I'm feeling the need to have some sort of a special meeting, or if it's just like a cow that's completely dedicated to COVID. And I'm just wondering how the rest of the council feels, but I feel like as we're seeing things come forward that we'd already discussed prior to COVID-19, I look at it and I think, well, would I felt the same way today about this project and so I almost feel like we need to rethink things and see if there's some projects or things that we should consider for the rest of 2020 not doing. I feel like we need to look at, and I just want to know how the council feels if we could consider having a special meeting about this. I'm very concerned.
If I could maybe summarize, so the concern is more about the economic impact of COVID-19 and our revenue stream, and just being able to have a good discussion about what that looks like. Is that correct?
Well, it's also about expenses as well, you know. There's things that we made priorities, and are they still priorities today? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
So it's about expenditures as well.
Yeah, I believe during our first meeting in May, Councilmember Napland, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm in support of that. My understanding is many council members have now met with finance and administration about, upcoming budget amendments and where we're at with things. And I think it all ties together.
Good.
If we look at the end of year fund balance at the end of 2019, and we look at where we're projecting to be for the general fund, we're going to be eating through $900,000 of fund balance if we compare the beginning of this year to the projected end of year. And I think that's concerning. And I think it's going to take a deep dive of thinking about, is that really what we want to do? Do we really want to spend down almost $1 million of general fund in 1 year?
Director Thomas, I think you had put up your virtual hand.
Yes, thank you. It was really just more of a housekeeping thing, and I just want everybody to know, I took a class on Zoom last week. If you all go down to the participants, click it, it will put the participants to the right, and then you can raise your hand through there, and whoever is moderating the meeting right now, it's Mike Remington, they'll go in order of hand raising, and then once you're done, you just unraise your hand, and it's a super easy way for both the mayor and Mike Remington to keep track of anybody that has questions. It was really just housekeeping. Thank you.
So on the very bottom under reactions is where you can
Under participants. So where participants is
I
over to
see
the
where
left.
you're.
And then push that, and then see over on the right hand. Yep, see, there you go. There's hands up. Yay!
So, Councilmember Rudnicki.
Okay, I'm not understanding. I hit the participant button and what am I supposed to do? I see a bunch of names.
So you push the participants you see on the right hand side and see where it says invite, mute me, or raise hand. You can raise your hand right there and it'll go and it's in order, and that way everybody can get called in that order and we can track it.
It says chat or invite. So to raise my hand, I hit chat.
No.
There's no hand something.
So go to participants. Look
I'm
down
in
at the bottom of your
participants.
Okay, we'll stop for now. I'll show you how to use it offline. I don't want to keep everybody going, and I'll show you what it looks like. So keep going.
Councilmember Langle.
I think I'm not, I don't think I'm muted. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. First thing is, which dovetails with the last two comments. I found a really good slide PDF. It was done by King County Economics for the Washington City County Managers Association. And it made some really good points. It supports the idea of doing some very in-depth scenario planning. And I will send that PDF out to everyone either tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. So food for thought. It's not a long thing. It's a very quick read. It's got some really good data in it. The second thing, which is not related to this topic, so I can raise my hand later on, but I did want to, it is under good of the order. How would you like me to go? I don't want to go off topic. I can wait.
Shall we wait and you want to do it at the end?
Yeah, I'll just do it at the end. It doesn't have to do specifically with COVID. It has to do with a report that Steve issued.
Okay.
A couple weeks ago. Thank you.
Councilmember McHenry.
I just wanted to say that I'm open to another meeting just to talk about those priorities and what Councilmember Hogue brought up.
Thank you. Mayor Ockerlander.
I would just like to ask Ms. Mason to address the $900,000 comment because $400,000 of that is simply moving the sale of the rec center out. And so Ms. Mason, can you please address that? And it also includes, the revenue also includes grants that we've received. So could you please address that to make some clarification?
Sure. So the change in fund balance, a big chunk of it, 400,000 of it, is the from the sale, taking away the sale of fixed asset, and that's in the general fund. So that brings the general fund down $361,000 from the budgeted ending fund balance. So really, we're adding about $32,000 or $39,000. And then the, the street CIP fund, we're taking away about $720,000 in transportation impact fees or street impact fees. So that's also a big chunk of the ending fund balance that's being brought down.
And Dana, just for clarification's sake.
Mayor, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. It keeps going back and forth on me without touching it, so I don't know what's going on. And I think it's really important to make clarification right now that those impact fees, That was part of the discussion that we actually had during the last budgeting process when the previous financer did not account for those projects that were vested under lower fees. And so that's one of the tasks that we've been waiting to be done with the finance director, and a huge chunk of that 750 is as a result of that, and it was not planned to be spent. So really it's an adjustment of numbers to be more accurate, just like we've been wanting all along.
So getting back to Councilmember Naplin's original question about putting this on I'm sorry, it was Councilmember Hogue about having a special meeting. It sounds like there's real support for that, and I think this is real timely. Dana, as I understand, you'll be bringing forward a presentation to council on our budget, and that may be a perfect time, especially at COW, to set some time aside or after your presentation to just be able to discuss where do we go from here. I think it'll be nice to see the foundation of how our budget's doing, and then talk about, certainly we're watching other cities that are having huge impacts to their revenues, and getting back to Councilmember Hogue's point, some of the things we've approved may need to be looked at again in light of revenue changes. So we certainly can have a separate meeting, but I think we could potentially do it at the next COW council and really set some time to dive into this. That'll give us some preparation time as well. And if it looks like we need more than that, we certainly can set up a special Zoom meeting where we can all just really dive in and try to have a better understanding. And it'll give staff, the mayor, and Dana opportunity to prepare for that as well. Does that sound like a good plan? Good. So Dorothy, I show your hand is still up. Did you have something else to say, or is that from previous? You're still muted.
No, I had the second good of the order thing, which was not
Okay.
about COVID.
Okay, this would be a good time.
Okay, I wanted to thank Steve for finishing that corridor study. I thought the report was very interesting. He, of course, did it relative to tracking traffic on 203 and the intersections and whatnot, but as somebody who's done community economic development, I saw the value of it from a very different perspective, because I think it gives us a very good understanding of leakage. And so yes, it tells us something about transportation and patterns, but it also tells us where people are going at certain types of intervals. And those are all places where retail activity is high. So it's unfortunate that we didn't have something like this out of the very expensive economic development study. But now we have it, and we have it from Steve. So thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you. Anyone else for the good of the order? Well, with that, we'll move on to our first item, and we do have 3 items tonight. The first one is our coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic emergency update, and I believe that's Director of Emergency Management, Sean Tozer. So you're up.
Awesome, very good. Well, good evening, Mayor and City Council. Sean, City of Duval Public Works or Emergency Management, or depends on the day. I'll do just about anything. So. I'm staying with the same theme I've used before. I do have a presentation for you guys, updating some of the same highlights, and then I sent some of the information. The specifics are what was sent in that snapshot before. So we'll kind of review some of that and then have an opportunity for some discussion. So I will share my screen and go to PowerPoint if I can find it. Where are you? You guys can't see that, can you?
Not yet,
Can you guys see
Sean.
the PowerPoint? Okay, good. You guys see this?
So I just see you right now, Sean.
Oh, nuts. That's what I was worried about. Oh, here we go. Share. Now can you guys see this? My cursor in there? Okay, perfect. All right, so off we go. Move you guys off to the side over here. And again, we're still too scared to to put it into presentation mode. I'm afraid I'll crash it. So here we go. So again, April 21st, here we are. Current situation. So from today's King County countywide call, and these numbers are changing all the time, but another 78 new cases identified and then 12 new deaths. Something they've been emphasizing a lot have been the homeless shelters, and then also the connection with the senior care facilities and those long-term living facilities. So the case count has kind of slowly was creeping up in homeless shelters and others, but then it kind of took off in the last week or so, where they really started identifying more homeless shelters that had at least one case associated with. So you see between the 27 that they list, there's 112 cases. So that's significant just because the congregate population. So again, another place where you might have vulnerable populations. And then also in one of the isolation and quarantine facilities in Kent, they actually had a death associated with that facility. They are doing some investigation it is somebody who did have COVID, but they're kind of determining what the causes of death was exactly. But again, some of the things that were interesting is just the amount of cases that revolve around a long-term care facility or other care facilities like a nursing home or something like that. But 66% of those deaths of the countywide deaths are associated with a facility like that. And again, in the older population. A big topic that's been going on the last week or so has been on the food bank support and then the National Guard missions. So a lot of food banks were making requests directly to the Washington, like the USDA, so an agriculture agency for the state of Washington, and they were getting direct National Guard missions, going outside of the county. So the county's kind of gotten on top of that, and they've opened a new food access branch, and so they're coordinating Guard assets and trying to reduce those emissions by doing the VOADs, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. So they're trying to mitigate the cost of the Guard missions and then also use the local resources a little bit more effectively than how this started. So they're getting on top of that. Actually, one of the people who is heading that up for King County, there's some new faces at King County OEM. And some of them are volunteer, and one of them is Andrew Stevens from Sammamish. So he's actually spearheading this food access branch logistics, and he's still working for Sammamish, but this is something he's doing kind of as an accessory item. And then again, also King County OEM has brought in some recovery-based folks, so some people who are really experts at FEMA cost recovery and the process for the grants and loans and other programs specifically for cities and government. So I'm happy to say that I went to one of our national academies with one of these people. So it's always nice to see somebody and the small circles. So it's nice to know that there'll be a friendly face helping us guide us through to get what we ultimately want to get, which is as much recovery as we can in lots of ways. And then also for us locally, resources, the personal protective equipment, and that'll come into play. You'll see more with what the governor had to say, but we've definitely had a lot more success acquiring material. Something we did at the end of last week was we assembled kits for PD, for public works, and then for general. And so each kit, depending on the makeup, had a different set of items. Like the PD had a couple extra masks, and then also we only had 10, but a couple medical gowns. That way they can put on some personal protection if they have a contact and then dispose of that. So we have 90 kits, so 30 for each group. And again, that's a really good start. So we have a tracking and catalog or asset management system, I guess. It's a tag. It's not an asset management, it's a sticker. So we're going to label these as they go out, and we'll be issuing them. And again, that meets our requirements to kind of be good stewards of our resources. And then also, besides those kits, which are ready to go right now for staff, we also have a decent amount of material on hand. So we have, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 masks of varying types. Again, that sounds like a lot, but we could also move through them really quickly depending on what the guidelines are, and if it's on per contact, or if it's, if we're opening them up to people coming into the city. So again, we're trying to be kind of judicious in how we use them, and then also make sure that we're acquiring the appropriate amount of stuff without hoarding material. We don't want to be those people. So again, I think we're in a pretty good situation currently. I can ask as we move through if you guys want, and I can't see if anybody wants to chime in as we go, or we can do it at the end, but other than that, I'll just work through each slide. Okay, so statewide situation, again, these are recaps. You can see that the date there is April 19th, so that's the most up-to-date that website was. So just gives you an idea for case counts. I also have some of the graphs in here further.
Hey, Sean.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. I think Councilmember Langle had some input or a question. Dot, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
I
I
showed
can
you had a
hear
hand
you.
up, so I just was checking in with you.
No, I can wait with my comment. Thank you.
All righty. Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good. Thank you for paying attention, because I think you see what I see. Okay, so there's a state, countywide again. You can see the numbers back from what I already told you. So, but again, it just gives you an idea of where we're at, current trends. And this is one of the ones that I think I spoke about before, but I didn't get a chance to put in. But you can see the hospitalization trend. So that's a good indicator, obviously, that they're on top of the kind of the treatment end of the world, and that things have come down a little bit to more manageable levels. And you've kind of gotten past that spike that people were really concerned about, a real key to the social distancing. And then also the epidemiologic curve there on the right, which again is just showing, if you put a nice little line in there, you can see that we kind of have a little bit of a camel hump in there somewhere. So we're still certainly getting more cases. We're still getting more deaths, but there is increased testing, but not enough. So again, I think both of those are kind of good indicators that we're maybe on the downward trend. Again, that doesn't mean that we stop doing what we're doing, but they're generally good signs, better off than where we were just a few weeks ago. So. All right, so, I see what that is. So just right before this, I was listening into the press conference with, and actually it's not a press conference, it's an address. So Governor Jansley addressed the people of the state, and then he had a lot to say. I think my initial feeling is that he said a lot, but we didn't hear enough. And so I did bullet out a lot of the items that we talked about. I mean, he obviously acknowledged the fact that people do want to get to work. He did talk more about that. Again, I think he's setting the expectation that May 4th is not your day. May 4th is not the day that things go back to normal. And he did specifically use that term. It's more like a dial than a switch. He did mention that a lot of what, and one of my other slide, I had started to include some stuff from Colorado because we weren't quite sure what the governor was going to have. But again, that phased approach and just really understanding and controlling the conditions on the ground before you start opening things up. And that really sounds like where Governor Inslee's going, which is great. And again, I think he'll probably flesh out some more of the details and share those with us in reasonably short order. But again, May 4th is definitely not the day that everything goes back to normal. And I don't think any of us expected that anyway, but again, as people start to say it, it impacts folks in a different way. He did promise that rapid response testing group, and they've talked about that a little bit at the county level, which has been a little bit of a frustration for some of us in cities, because they talk about doing the contact tracing, and then we also ask, well, what is the local roles, and how are you fleshing out those teams, and what are you going to use? And so I think there's a lot more to come out on that. Again, if their goal really is to test and find contacts and isolate groups of people who've had contact, they're really going to need to have a really strong local game everywhere. And we don't see that yet, but again, we have a little bit of time before May 4th. He talked again, I won't go verbatim here, but again, this is going to be with us for months to come. It's going to affect our daily lives. Some of the employers are going to have additional challenges moving forward because it's not going to be the same workplace that everybody's been into. And he specifically said the life in the era of COVID-19, which again, I thought was kind of interesting. So I did grab a couple of the graphics that they put up right afterwards. So I can send this to you guys also, so you have all this, but these are really just that infographic version of the speech, which is the high points, in a very consumable fashion. So these are in order, sort of his goals and what he was intending to do, how he plans to do it. Again, you see the elements of testing and quarantine and identification. And he did talk a bit about that things really probably won't be back to normal until you get a vaccine, which we all know is a very long way away. So again, this still speaks to his process of how he intends to go, the strategy that he intends to employ to kind of keep the virus contained and to kind of mitigate any future cluster outbreaks, which nobody wants. And then again, the safe return to work. So reopening in phases, he did talk a lot about the workplace of our future is not going to be the workplace that we all came from. So it's going to have a lot more, there will be a lot more emphasis on protection for employees and cleaning and maintaining physical distancing. So that has real world implications for every employer, us included, and how we are going to conduct business from the foreseeable future. Again, light on details, but there's definitely some framework here that I assume is going to get built off of quite a bit. I promised I wasn't going to take this out, so I'm just going to leave it in. And every time we're going to roll by it and you guys will see it, and you're going to say, oh, like, I remember the circle of disaster and all the other graphs. So I leave this in here, not for an item to talk about at the moment, but just a good reminder. Again, the fact that we're into this for a very long time. So kind of overviewing some of the financial bits of it. Again, you guys already have seen this. You know that we're tracking things as appropriately as possible. We're rolling up costs, and we should have a reasonably good picture that's getting better all the time. It's getting more and more clear. Again, a lot of this should be familiar from the incident snapshot from over the weekend, but this one I threw together kind of today because I saw some new numbers in the sheets that finance had run, and then I wanted to kind of aggregate them together in a way similar that I had before. But you can see the AP run for the beginning of April, and then the one that was reported here for this meeting. And then I had previously reported about that $23,000 in other costs that we're looking at. So I told you we'd give you the best estimates we have as we have them, and we're going to report actuals as we have actuals. But that's still, as we're moving forward and we're running forward, these are kind of the numbers we're assigning as where we're at the moment. So again, that's for incident expenditures, it's computers, it's webcams, it's masks, it's anything and everything. Some of it is a consultant costs and attorney costs. There's a bunch of stuff rolled into those expenditures.
Hey, Sean.
Yes, sir.
The question on cost, maybe I'm getting ahead of your presentation. I had heard it was closer to 100,000, and that included everything, including personnel, overtime, and so on. Is that just a different category, or was that 100,000 number high?
What a good segue you had there. Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, you're right, and I saw that in the file, which is why I started adjusting. But yes, the total, once you add in personnel costs, it's right around the 100,000 that we're looking at. So again, and we don't have it quite as clean in this yet, but you'll see that. So incident staff costs, and I think we did this appropriately to what you guys were looking at. And again, remember that this is through the most recent pay period, so time entered up to 4/15. And Dana, if I say something wrong or something step on my foot, let me know. But ultimately, you guys have seen this again. I added the last two columns, you know, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, just because I like to start seeing percentages. Go ahead, Mayor.
I was just going to have you clarify, Sean, is that all overtime, or is that regular time plus overtime that's all related to COVID? So some of it already budgeted, but COVID billable.
Yeah, so each of these columns is exactly that detail that we're looking for. So we have, I guess if we can go right to left, here's all your regular hours that counted to 998-100. So that is our project management code for COVID. So this is COVID related work and or expenditures, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. So this is regular hours in these pay periods. You can see by pay period how many regular hours were assigned to this code. Mayor authorized, which again is a category for leave and some other items that we used at the very beginning generally. And then overtime. So you see overtime specific. special duty pay for exempt. And then the big one, which was obviously the non-exempt, what ended up being that premium pay. And I put these in italics, and I can't see you, Dana, but I put these in italics because this was a modifier. This column here was a modifier to regular time. So I believe that the 350 in that same regular time is also 350. So this might not be 1,440 hours. I think it's 1,100 hours, if that makes any sense to you guys. Because again, that special duty pay was a modifier to base wages. So I hope that makes sense. But this might be kind of not quite accurate as far as the sum. Dana, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, the extra or the special duty pay, that was just adding a 0.5 to an hour that somebody was working on site. So they may not have been working on COVID related issues, but they were paid 0.5 in addition to their regular hour. I hope that makes sense.
So it's inclusive of other regular time, I guess. It's not.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's not 960 separate hours. It's 960 hours that were modified by the policy. So,
John, I believe the council member Knappman has a question for you.
So thanks. When I was looking at the total, the 77,000, so when you talk about the 963 hours, that there was the extra half pay. When you figured out the dollars, if they were working on regular non-COVID stuff, you wouldn't include those, the regular time in that total, only the extra half, right? Or are you including anytime anyone came in during, does that make sense? So I'm trying to figure out what's in the 77,000. If it's only the half, if the hours they were here, they were doing regular work.
so for, and Dana, you might have to assist on this one a little bit, but most of the regular time would be straight COVID. But I think with the special duty pay, and again, Dana, you might be able to help on this, that had the 998-100 attached to it. So whether they were working or not, when they used that code, it was the way we set it up. So it automatically categorized it there because it was influenced by that. I hope that kind of makes some sense. So I think that might be.
Yeah. I mean, then it would sort of overstate because there were a lot of people that came in during that time period that might have been the crew out mowing lawns. It really had nothing to do with coronavirus. And so really the amount that's related to coronavirus is just that extra half.
Yeah, and that's actually why. So on the right-hand side there, I just used a quick number of 42 FTEs times 86.67, which is our standard hours per pay period. So each pay period, you get 3,640 hours of available hours amongst FTEs, if my numbers are right. And then that's why I added that percentage. So you can kind of see how that is a bit of an anomaly at 39%. So we know that things didn't bump up. There wasn't 39% more of work that was all COVID related. It's that influencer of the special duty and how we categorized it.
I guess I'm just thinking that could answer, does the 77,000 include only the extra half time, or does it include any hours that were worked during that time and a half period?
It just includes the extra half time,
Okay.
and then any full hours that were coded to the COVID virus.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Dana. So again, none of these are perfect. None of these numbers are perfect. Again, we're just showing what we got. So again, you can at least look at those categories of hours. You can kind of see how things laid out. You can see how it affected work in general. And again, a general account of costs of where we are. So hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. I hope. Again, every pay period will have similar numbers to report, and we'll get a little better at this, get it clean.
John, I have a brief question for you. Do we have the ability to give us some idea on anticipating additional COVID-related costs? I assume at the beginning, especially with policy development and ordering up supply. I mean, there's just a lot to do. But and a lot of equipment. I think there were the AV and some other things. So, can you give us an idea of what to expect moving forward? Is there any way to estimate that roughly?
I think the best representation would be that pay period for 320 and 420. Because again, that's the work that I was pretty much 100% dedicated to, and then also that any of the directors who coded time or allocated any time over. Because again, obviously the chief's doing work on this, mayor is doing work, Steve, Dana, and there's just some general, and Laura, and there's others as well. But I think those would be good representations. So if we're looking at it, it'd be those kind of hours. Those are match up pretty well, 6% or 220 some odd hours per pay period.
One last question for me, and then I think Matt has a question as well. Under the recovery part, and we may be a long ways away before we really dive into that, but certainly some of the things that will be helpful for council in the future is what does opening up the city again look like? A lot of that depends, of course, on the governor and directives and direction and smart science and medicine in terms of taking care of our employees. But it might help to have some idea what that's going to look like. Are we going to do it in stages? So some picture of that would help. And then the last one that is certainly a biggie that we don't necessarily have a huge impact, but that's our economic recovery. I know you're working with the Chamber of Commerce closely, you and the mayor. I think the mayor's still having, weekly or every 2 weeks meetings with the chamber directly. But that would help us as well to get an idea of what we as a city might be able to do. I know on our webpage, you put a lot of information that would be helpful for anybody that owns a business in town.
Mayor, did you want to address that?
Thank you. So that's a great question on recovery. So we've asked departments to begin working on their individual recovery plans because every department is going to have to recover and reopen differently. Clearly, the police department is 24/7, so they're having to remain full staff as it is. I know Chief Hurt has got his draft recovery plan going. And part of our recovery plan will in fact be guided by what the governor's office does. I'm asking our staff to be prepared for, somebody needs to put it on mute. Can everybody mute their phones, please? So part of that reopening will be guided by what the governor says. It's possible that we may be more stringent at the outset as far as our staffing goes than other jurisdictions might be because of our small staff and the risk of the illness still being there. But all of that stuff is being worked on as we speak. And when we get those done and ready, we'll be able to bring them forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Iyer.
My comment mirrored your comment, Councilmember Remington, in that of wondering if there's a plateau of effort in terms of what that looks like, if we if we once the ramp up is once we've completed the ramp up, but it sounds like you're saying 420, the week of 420 is what you would look at, Sean, for coming weeks?
Yeah, I think that those are the most representative, that week of 320 and the 320 pay period, the 420 pay period. Both of those are pretty representative because a lot of us were doing things in the background. Again, pretty much 100% of my time is now dedicated to this. So I think those are both pretty good representations, and maybe even a little less as we get a little further away and there's less, it becomes more focused and more on recovery and doing applications and accounting and stuff like that.
Councilmember Lingle has a question.
Actually, this has been a really good presentation. Thank you very much, Sean. One of the things that came to my mind, which coincidentally just sort of loops back into Councilmember Hoag's comment, is that there are certain, as we reconsider what our priorities are for expenditures, those new priorities are going to be shaped about, in a great deal, potentially, about ways to make our workplace more safe. And the beauty of that is, if we think back on some of our recent facility inspections, there's some things that were identified in those processes which just happen to be very in line with what you would need to do for COVID retrofitting. So I think that maybe what we should do is, as we all kind of mull over Sean's slides, is start making a little bit of a list of ideas, because once we get into really scenario planning around the next way to operate with COVID, it'd be nice to see everybody's list. I mean, I can think of one thing right off the top of my head. We talked about the need to do more separation between staff and the public in the city hall as people walk in the door. And we looked at that from a very different safety perspective, but now we have a health safety perspective. So that's a real easy one. So if we're going to spend money on something, our employees have to come first, and our facilities should come first. And so it just so happens that COVID gives us yet a unfortunate, but another reason to do that work. Does that make sense?
Does to me, Dot. Mayor Pro Tem, I know Mayor Amy had something.
I wanted to just kind of stress on the recovery as well, is that, you know, the WHO is predicting a potential worse second wave in the fall, coinciding with the flu. So as we look at recovery, we're also going to be needing to look at planning for the second wave, if and when that does impact us, particularly if it's worse than the one before. So I forgot to mention that before, and I just want to make it clear that we've got our eyes on that as well, and are really trying to think of the long-term ramifications of how we're going to operate should we get that second wave and what it looks like here.
Well, Sean, how are we doing on our presentation?
Almost done.
Okay.
Right here. So revenue, next slide. And again, this is nothing new. You guys have seen this already. It was in the snapshot. Again, I know Dana and admin is looking at the other revenues that are obviously vitally important. We don't have any new information on water utilities, but by the next meeting we will, because another billing cycle will be complete. But last time there was very little there. But what we do have and what we can very clearly report to you is the impact to Big Rock Ball Field rentals. And so you can see the different user groups and what we could have expected to have brought in revenue from each of those user groups. And then again, a total through the end of June 2020. So if things start coming back in July, which is a light rental month anyway, with the camp or something, then maybe we can see some pluses in there. But for now, that is the specifics of what we have there. And then that's it. Questions, comments, discussion. Just as a quick aside, we have not had any phone calls or any inquiries or requests for assistance to our hotline number or our email, which is a good thing. I talked a bit about with the Citizen Corps, and again, I think we do know we have a resilient community, which is a benefit for us. It's a blessing for everybody else. And then also the Medical Reserve Corps, which is a part of Citizen Corps. They're going to be hosting. And we're helping to facilitate like a mask drive or something. So they're going to be trying to hand out surgical or handmade cloth masks that they're making, and then provide them at the IGA Incarnation and the Safeway in Duval. So that'll be coming up this weekend.
Well, thank you, Sean. Nice presentation. I still show a hand up for Councilmember Iyer and Councilmember Lango, and I don't know if those were held over from your previous question. Okay, so those are gone. So I think I don't see any other questions, but I'll ask, does anybody else have a question or feedback for Sean? Well, seeing none, thank you, Sean. Nice work.
Hey, I got a little something to say to Sean. If anybody doesn't know already, it's Mr. Tozer's birthday. So if you would all join me in saying happy birthday to Mr. Tozer.
Oh,
thank you
geez.
for all your work, especially on your birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Mr. Tozer.
Oh, you're so nice. So nice. Thank you guys. Yay. I plan to stick around for Cal if you guys need something, but for council, I'm out.
All righty. Sean, thank you so much. Well, we will move on to our second agenda item, which is the 2021-2026 six-year transportation improvement program. And that's a presentation discussion with the Public Works Director, Liniszewski.
Okay, I am unmuted, and I think I would just share my screen if that's okay. Let's see, and I might look to the left because my larger is to my left, which I will host my information. And I do kind of like that we each have a screen in front of us because you can kind of see what's there in lieu of a PowerPoint that is not always inclusive of the entire list of material, but now you're looking at what we're all looking at. So I can just get my screen to go back here, go full. So in backtracking and kind of working, from front to back on the Transportation Improvement Program, it is due in July. We need hearings. We have to start discussion on it. What sort of year are we going to have? I think we were a little behind last year with February and everything else that came out of last year's pace. So I wanted to make sure we just started the discussion early, giving us plenty of time to either keep this light, make the changes, just move forward, or try to throw the baby out with the bathwater and start over, which I don't think anybody is up for, because we did do a look at this in 2017, prior to my re-arrival here. So I think if you had an opportunity to read over the memo, some of the highlights are taking projects off of our list that have been completed. We tried to insert numbers because I've had questions on revenue offset, i.e. impact fees that developers get credit for. So we tried to put some real numbers in the document that show what has been expended by the development community that is relative to the projects on the list. So just trying to provide a little more information. So those projects are the extension of 3rd Avenue, of course, from Big Rock up to 143rd, which is open but not officially open at the intersection. And we were on pace for that, honestly, but with COVID, there doesn't seem to be the rush, and it's fine sitting there as it is. The Big Rock Road, the frontage portion between Main Street and 3rd Avenue is complete with the finalization of the toll project on Big Rock. And the 2nd Avenue, which is M7, which for those who may or may not know, that is the I'm going to flip quickly, not to get you car sick, to the image. Can you see my pointer, or do I need to use my pointer? Here we go. So the M7, if you weren't aware, is an extension between Big Rock Road and 143rd in that region. Toll Brothers did half of it, so that is a creditable stub. But that's what that project is. Let me close that. So that is what is listed as completions. Again, their numbers are there. They have invested a significant amount of money, which offsets some of the revenue we should expect in the Transportation Improvement Fund. Being a complete streets agency, we are required to report, so we take this opportunity to report, which is good. It summarizes some of the additional improvements and features we have in the city relative to roads and or sidewalks, paths, and bike lanes. We chose this year too to add what we expect over the whole planning period. I think last year we just did the 2-year period, which is the budget period, but we put in the entire 21 to 26 period in this memo. What those dedicated improvements will be. And then just updating the list itself, not updating the costs. So those are things I know I've mentioned with certain folks, maybe not everybody, because we haven't necessarily talked about this in full, but updating our estimates certainly updates and offsets what our impact fee calculations might be. I did talk to staff, which is Larissa and myself. That is something we can do. We are set up to take the work that was done and update it. Just some words of caution are, agreeing upon the numbers on the list and what we would increase them by. You have to be cautious because you are increasing or changing your impact fee, which the development community will weigh in on. But as projects come off the list, right, the numerator and the denominator change. So denominators and numerators always change, which is totally acceptable. But I think just how we move forward, and if there is, I guess, some agreement early too on how far we want to go. Do we want to update the numbers? Do we want to set new cost inflators in? How far do we want to go with that? And then we have to kind of stretch and pick where we put projects on the list, which can be a challenge. We're trying to get to it in a 6-year period, but we know we will likely not get to everything on the list in a 6-year period. So that is kind of my opener, and I know it seems early, which I wanted to make sure meeting after meeting after meeting we did have time to bring changes and discussions forward, but I wanted to get this drafted and put out there because there is a sunset. We should have it reported to the state by July 1, and it is an important document. I haven't heard of anything out of the state that is going to suspend any of our work. So at this point, I have no reason to not try to move forward unless they say, hey, this year's everybody gets a timeout. I don't know that that's coming. I'm not a mind reader. So I haven't heard anything like that. I don't know if Laura's heard anything, but I have not heard anything out of the state on those types of activities. So,
Steve, I believe Council Member Langle has a question for you.
Absolutely. No, she's not unmuted.
I think we need to have you unmute, Dot.
Sorry.
There you go.
I clicked it. I've actually been thinking about this over the last few days because it seems like everything's pretty out of sync right now. And I'm wondering if an approach we should pursue is rather than wait for the state to say, yes, July 1, no, July 1, maybe what we should do is go to the state and say, we want to do it later. And the reason I say that is when you start to think about all of the things that are in motion, the changes economically, and I mean, literally, I've not seen anything that gives a lot of hope before 2023. It seems like maybe it's just as valid to go to the state and say, we want an extra 30 days, or we want an extra 60 days to get our stuff back in. Because when I looked at what really triggered this thinking was this idea of having a public hearing in May. Well, the governor's just said we're not really opening up that much. And yet this is this is an important thing in the community to have a public hearing around. And there's only so many things you can do well with a Zoom. So the longer that the governor himself is creating these periods of transition time, it seems to me, maybe we don't wait to hear from them. We write to them and say, we want an extra 60 days because we've got a lot of work to do in figuring out our finances. It's not going to be a small thing. It's going to be a very intense and difficult thing. So that's my comment, and I'd like to hear what Steve thinks about that.
I certainly think we can find someone and ask. Whether they listen or care is another story, but I don't think there's any harm in asking. Certainly a fair question as far as, I'm making some notes, as far as, the hearing part of this. So, yeah.
Yeah. Just to continue with this is, I mean, small cities are in such a tough spot because we are small staff-wise. And I don't want to see us do anything that is going to put us in a financial situation where we lose employees. And so in order to handle this financial analysis, it's just going to take so much of everybody's time. And I would suggest considering literally writing to the state formally and asking for a 60-day extension or whatever you think would work. I mean, sure, give them a call if but I think it's worth a formal request. And maybe some of your colleagues in other small cities would benefit from a similar approach. I just don't see how everything can be done well. And the money is the most important.
Well, I think your point, even if let's say nothing changes, but how do you hold a productive hearing and make sure the community is allowed to share input and I don't know. We don't have anybody besides us all on this meeting tonight so far. Granted, it's the committee meeting, but we've had a few other numbers over the last couple meetings. So.
Well, Steve, we have.
Yeah.
Steve, we also have Director Thomas has a question, and then Councilmember Hoag, and then Councilmember Iyer. So Laura, can you go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Remington. So just going into maybe a little bit what Dot said is we can actually prepare a resolution that talks about different items that we may want to have essentially told, which would include potentially the TIP. There's also building code, energy code, floodplain regulations. So I think that as administration, we could work on that and then send that resolution to the governor's office.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoag.
So my question would be for Anne Marie. How do you hold a public hearing when we're in this stay-at-home order?
Anne Marie, I show you're still on mute. Are you there?
Maybe she's out of the room.
Yeah, we may have to come back. Let's go ahead and do a question from Councilmember Iyer, and then Michelle will come back to you.
So just to be clear on Councilmember Langle's point, I mean, there's kind of a three-part thing there, in terms of the effectiveness of public meetings, asking for a delay, but towards the end, it was seemingly to say that you do support looking at the numbers again and updating the numbers, just to be clear.
That's for you, Dot.
Any of that would be fine. I mean, I would defer actually to someone like you, Matthew, on that one. I mean, if you do update the numbers, though, it does open up yet another reason why you've got to have a robust opportunity for public hearing, because you do have to hear from the development community. And this is a really, when you look at the economic projections, we were actually already in a slowing period for construction in King County. Not massive, but some. And they're saying, certainly even a lot more now. So I guess what I'm saying is there's so many unknowns right now economically, both for us as well as the area, that you can only do so many really critical emergent things well at once, and we are in an emergency situation. So I'll defer to you, Matthew Iyer, on the importance of redoing numbers on the streets. But
Great.
The more you change it, the more the need for a public process.
Is Matt going to redo the numbers?
Oh, I was going to, I was just getting clarification on that point, and because there was a lot there. But Steve, I was looking. What year were the numbers from?
I think Laura was around, and the major look was in 17. Is that a fact, Laura? Where'd she go?
Have you looked at these and any of them jumped out in particular to you that you were like, whoa, that's off? I mean, I think it's tough, just to, speaking to the point that one of the points that Mr. Laniszewski, was asking in terms of the updating the numbers. It's tough. We were, from 17 to now, we're on an upswing of cost of doing business in terms of, bidding climate. This could very well, flatten the road. But then, it also, we might be in a position too where, you don't want to climb on the back of, it's a bad time to if things do, go badly, it's not the best time to be piling on with, because we were pretty, the fees were very conservative and fair in the last round. So that, I guess it's the climate plays into the decision to redo numbers. But that, I don't know. I mean, I'll basically defer to Steve, I guess. I don't know. Steve, thoughts, bidding climate?
Well, yeah. And I pulled this slide back up just to show. So, M1, the 3rd Avenue extension, the number we expected it to cost is $2,014,000. The subnote below it, developer spent 1.37. So a little high, but again, estimates are estimates. We have to be cautious. You can look at R11 and it flipped the other way. We expected 1.2 and change and it went to 2.28. Now, some of that was elements that we likely wouldn't have done on our own. There's a lot of concrete elements in the roundabout and that traffic control situation there. So, front end is usually more expensive for traffic and intersections with a roundabout because maintenance over time, you don't have a signal heads, cabinets, controllers, all those things take money over time. A roundabout is a fixed status thing. You're just maintaining the structure itself. So I do like to stress, this is a great tool to show we're completely doing our best to estimate, and by the math of it, it all seems to work out when you look at the whole, but not an individual basis. So I think that's apparently clear in those 3 projects with the 3 amounts. So way under on one, way over on the other. When you average it out, we're right in the middle. So fair enough. And, as far as being an economic strategist today, good luck. I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. And this could be a great time. I was talking to, Councilmember Remington earlier. This is a great time for those who have put their money in savings to not take advantage per se of the costs that will be out there. But if the costs are low because people want to do work, then we will have an opportunity to significantly invest in our community at a discount. So it is a double-edged, sword with the community. If we can make, hay while we can, then we should. Capital money. I don't want to dissuade a conversation in general because it's always great to talk about numbers as a whole, which council elected to want to do in the beginning of the meeting. But capital money is capital money. We can't use it to pay my wages anyway. So capitally speaking, moving forward to the best of our abilities to take advantage of the market and, keep people working is part of our role too. And it improves our community for our citizens. So it's something to weigh, but I couldn't guess if I had to, and that, so.
We've got a few other folks. I think in order here, I think Mayor Okerlander and then Councilmember Napland and then Councilmember Brudnicki. So we have a few folks kind of in line. Let's start with Mayor Okerlander.
So to the point of the public hearing, I think as this time goes on, I suspect the governor and the Attorney General's office are going to issue temporary guidelines for how to conduct public hearings and receive effective testimony. Because the reality is, unless they take away these mandates and deadlines, we can't do that effectively. That said, this would be considered routine and necessary business because it's a state mandate. So I think that we have some time to hold off on that, and we can certainly get our opinion out to the governor's office and Sound Cities and all those that are helping to advocate for this. Because, it could be months before we have the actual in-person meetings again. And I think that's a very real possibility. And if we do have groups together, you would have to limit how many people even come into the council meeting, which would be certainly unfeasible and not to the spirit of the Open Public Meetings Act. So I think that we will probably get some additional guidance as time goes on. But I also feel strongly that we do need to be looking at the cost of the projects again. We may have opportunities to get some things done based on either state programs or federal infrastructure programs that are going to come forth. And so making sure that we're updated and being able to capture the real costs where it concerns impact fees is a priority of mine. That said, this also may be a good opportunity to knock some lower things off the list should the funding exist, because with oil prices dropping so significantly, there's a good chance that asphalt and those types of things will also reduce significantly in cost. So we've seen the opposite in my time on the council with gas prices going up and the cost of projects going up as a result. And we might see the opposite this time. So I think, you know, keeping an open mind, making sure that we're expressing what we need to express to the governor's office on what we need and what guidance we need and what assistance we may need to get these things done would be helpful. I am cautious about moving beyond the July deadline because that's the middle of budget season. And unless we're ready to go by July on this, I think that it makes the budgeting process a little bit more difficult. So just kind of the lens that I'm looking at it through, and I don't disagree with any comments that are being made, but I wanted to try and provide some perspective of what I suspect will be happening.
Before I get to Councilmember Naplin and Councilmember Brudnicki, Anne Marie, we had a question for you. Councilmember Hogue had asked, how do we deal with public hearings and so on? This was related to our transportation improvement plan. How do we effectively conduct a public hearing in this day and age?
That's a great question. Sorry I missed your question earlier. My dogs were barking at someone at my door. So, you know, right now we're at the point where we haven't gotten any really great guidance from the governor's office or the attorney general's office about public hearings. They have advised that unless it's a necessary and routine matter, that you probably shouldn't have it. But I have seen some cities that are full steam ahead, moving forward with their public hearings, and others who are not handling any matter that involves a public hearing. I did hear from one of my colleagues about a public hearing that she attended, I think it was last week, with the city of Covington, and she said it actually moved pretty smoothly. It really depends on how the city staff is really monitoring how, you know, when people want to speak and when they don't. But if it is something where you have a deadline and you need to get it done, and it's not something that's out of the ordinary, something like the TIP, that's a routine item of business for the city. If you have a deadline and we're not receiving guidance from the governor's office that that deadline can be moved, then it might be something that you want to just move forward with as being a necessary and routine item. And so you have your public hearing. How you actually have that public hearing, I think one of the things that you can do is put out a lot of information in advance about providing public comments via email or in writing some way, providing some really good guidance on how you're going to take the public hearing and the public comments during the hearing, whether you're going to have people do a sign-up sheet or if you're going to have them raise their hand, you know, something so that it's organized, because otherwise, since the public, when they're attending these meetings, are attending telephonically, that can get a little bit more difficult because we don't see them raising their hands. We don't see them on the video or have the little hand raised thing on the side. Maybe that, I don't know, maybe Laura knows if that works even if you're on, if you're just on the telephone. Well, I guess there wouldn't be a way to do it on the phone, but you know, something where you can have it kind of organized a little bit better so it's not just a free-for-all and people just talking. But I know that some cities are doing it and some cities seem to be doing it fine. And, you know, it might be worth a phone call to some of our neighboring jurisdictions to kind of see how they're handling these things. I think City of Redmond has also been having public hearings. I believe the City of Tukwila had public hearings.
It looks like your screen might have frozen. Oh,
Me?
Anne-Marie, there you're back.
Oh, sorry. It was because Laura just sent me a message saying that, yes, you can raise your hand via Zoom, but I think if people are only attending telephonically, so if the public is attending telephonically, then I don't know if they have the ability to also, oh, she says yes by phone too. So I think we would just want to put out the information in advance so that the public knows how that works. And then at the beginning of the public hearing, probably start with some instructions, how, you know, this is how we're going to handle the public hearing. This is how you would raise your hand, and kind of outlining how the hearing is going to go so that it's really clear at the start.
Well, Anne Marie, thank you. We have about 5 more minutes on this topic, and I believe Councilmember Napland and then Councilmember Bernicki had some input as well. So Councilmember Napland, let's start with you.
Great, thank you so much. So I have a few questions, I'll be quick. Does our impact fee for the transportation program, is that adjusted at all by CCI, CPI, I don't know what we would, and then if it isn't, do other cities do that? Could we do that? Just to stay more up to date. And then just a little bit of a comment. When we come up with these cost estimates, they would be if they were done by the public sector, which we have potentially a higher cost than if it's done by the private sector. So is it possible that's one of the reasons why we're seeing some projects come in lower than we had estimated it potentially done by the private sector? And then something I've seen other cities do, and I think we might do it for our utility type CIP stuff, where we show the next 6 years and projects when we might plan to do them. Because one thing that's always been a struggle with me with the transportation plan is just a big list of we really should do this, and then we really don't do most of it. And a lot of it is required by concurrency. So when we approve development, we're really saying we are going to mitigate the traffic impacts, and we have, I believe, 6 years. So maybe Steve can comment on that. But I feel a little bit worried that we don't have a specific plan to accomplish or pay for any of these projects. We're really at the mercy of potentially getting a grant or a developer coming in and doing something. So.
So yes, our fees are indexed. We have the resolution at the end of 2019. I was just reviewing it to clarify which indices we use for park, sewer, water, storm capital. That's engineering news record, the construction cost index, transportation is in there somewhere. Transportation impact fee is the same. So engineering news record, construction cost index. That was step one. So we do that. A lot of other agencies do that as well. So that is standard practice. So you do try to keep up with construction at the time. Your concurrency question, yes, sometimes these are not only listed, but they are kind of Gantt charted where you have, your 6-year term, your projects in here, not only what you're going to fit in, but where all your development communities projects lie.
And then also how you're going to pay for it. I've seen that with a lot of them too, like where are the funds going to come from?
Right, and ours is fairly generalized between traffic impact fees from the development community as well as grants and city match. So it is a big exercise. Not that we're never up for a challenge, but it's something to consider. And probably work plan more like a year, not a month and a half, because we want to have something that was realistic and, really showed what we could or couldn't do. And the intent of GMA is to, have the 6-year program, but make sure you're doing your best to try and get things done. Funding is part of that math. So, and then the other questions you had at the end of that, I've already forgotten because I wrote the first
we base
three.
the project cost based on if the public sector,
the
project do, and subject to prevailing wage versus private sector.
Yeah, so obviously we always pay, we routinely pay more by quoting services with prevailing wage. Depending on grants, you may have to do federal Davis-Bacon. There's a lot of rules on strings if there's federal money involved or not. But I think some ways we've done it in the past is, get a consultant on board, use staff, however it is, go over projects, go out to the other project boards that are out there that have bid projects, reach out to our other agencies and see what they're getting for numbers and try to incorporate, reasonable projects in their numbers into our numbers. And it's a big task because not every project is exactly the same. So there's a lot of kind of contention in that sort of activity, but that is the one realistic way to go. And nothing's perfect. Some, grading is huge, walls are huge. Some projects have more, some projects have less. And it's always hard. And I know this may seem strange to some, but we can't control a bid line where a bidder puts their money. They could ram every dollar they want to the MOB and have $1 per square yard of asphalt. But we can't control the number, so it is hard to get apples to apples when you are looking at a bunch of other projects, because we don't know who put what where when they won that bid. So it is always a chore to kind of go into the details of trying to quote things out.
So Councilmember Brudnicki, do you think you can give us a real quick question?
Yep, mine is always quick, very quick. So Steve, I'm just interested in the ability and flexibility to take advantage of future discounts. So the example was when we did Main Street, we saved over $1 million because we had hit it at a time when the markets were down, and it was great timing for us as far as, economy and that sort of thing. That kind of aligned very well. So my question is, what direction do you think we should take or be the best option at this point in order to take advantage if there's going to be any future discounts or opportunity?
I mean, I think kind of our fiduciary duty is, if we have it and we have the need, we should try to do the work. And this is a time where, others would benefit by having jobs of us needing to do work. So I don't know if that briefly answers your question. And then just a step back, Mr. Tozer made a note here when the city did the 2017 update, they did review and aggregate some of the costs that the city paid with Main Street South, so right out in front of our office here. I'm sitting in my office. So they did try to make sure that they were looking at everything else, and they had their own numbers that were fresh, which is always good to have. Because you want to have legitimate numbers where the development community can't really argue, right? You want your numerator to be real, and denominator is easy. You can figure out what's left in the system and go from there. But so back to that. And then Diane, did I answer your question enough? I mean,
yeah,
it's the best value you can get is in a economic downturn. So
true, and I've seen it happen a few times. So
good question. And Steve, thanks for working on this. It's just a real important topic for us.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're ready to move on. Anything else for us, Steve?
I think you want to talk about 275th, but maybe Laura can do her project coming up, and then if we have time, I can do that or do it at council. Either way.
We may wind up moving the 275th and working it in during one of your 4 presentations at council meeting. Laura, are you able to do your presentation now in about 10 minutes, or shall we move it to city council?
I can do it in about 10 minutes, and there's no rush on this, so if we wanted to carry it over in conversation, we can. Let me share my screen, hopefully. Let's see if that shares it. Oh, it's not. Are you able to see where it says community development?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure what you were seeing because it's gray over here on the other side. So good evening, Mayor and Council. This is really a memo just for an initial conversation. Obviously, this is related to us and our pandemic and the COVID issue. It's also something similarly that was done in the 2009 recession. Ultimately, the governor went to the legislature the last time and essentially told a lot of projects and allowed them to be active for a longer period of time. We think that the governor is likely going to do that again. We're not sure about the timing, whether he'll do it through a proclamation or if he would do it in a special session or wait until next year. But within the planning director community, a lot of communities are starting to move at least temporary interim ordinance that would suspend certain timelines. And so some communities are looking at it based on, like, say, January 1st as a date. If an application was complete, that it would still be considered active at least for another 6 months. And you often will do that because in codes, you have requirements that say if a permit's inactive for so long, it's no longer a valid permit. That also happens in our building department when there's inspections. A building permit's only good for so long, and you have to have inspections within a certain amount of time. It also applies to projects that are under construction, for example, say Duval Village, who's still finalizing some of their improvements. Their permit is going to be expiring pretty soon. This would allow us to allow that permit to be active for an additional 6 months. It also would allow, if at least the governor does this, potentially for plats that have preliminary plat status that may be within a year or two of expiring or within months, to be extended for a certain period of time. We would probably look at doing something fairly minimal and not rushing to it, in hopes, honestly, that the governor takes care of it instead of cities. So are there any questions from council?
I like the idea. This is Matt Iyer. I like the idea of the minimal approach, and with the idea, that it's the appropriate action for, that the governor would come in and take action.
Do you have a question? Councilmember Lingle?
No, I don't have a question. I just did a thumbs up. I was agreeing with
Okay.
Councilmember Iyer.
I was going to give a thumbs up when Councilmember Iyer was kissing a baby. I thought that was classic during a council meeting.
That's
a
pretty
baby
good
in
too.
there.
That's pretty good too. But basically, I do think that she's right. It's good to have that flexibility if you get in a permitting, in this type of a permitting situation. So
Laura, anything else for us? Any other questions from council members?
That's really it on, at least for this item. I don't know if it really leaves enough time for Steve to talk about 275th, but he can also do that under either the mayor's or administrative report.
Can we do that? I know Dot also had a question on a report. I'd love, if it's okay with the mayor, I'd like to work those in at the council meeting, not as a formal, maybe we can just do it when council has a chance. You can put your hand up and ask the question. That way we can be timely. It also allows us to adjourn this meeting, so you can take a couple of minutes break before we have to show up in 5 minutes. Does that work for everybody? Mayor's nodding. So let's move the 275th question, as well as Dot's question on a report Steve provided to city council meeting. And with that, if there's no other questions or feedback, we will adjourn our COW for Tuesday, April 21st. So we'll end this meeting, and Jody, we'll have you set us up for city council meeting.
Yep, I'll go start it right now so you guys can get in the waiting room.
Thank you.
See you in a
Thank
few.
you guys. Have a good night.